All right, I think we're in.
Okay.
I think, Rob, you're gonna need to mute yours. Yeah.
Was the light time? How about one of those? You're on mute.
Hey, Vicky, you'll want to mute. Right, we don't want to be muted because. Right, because we want to listen to it to work. All right, let's get started. We will go over the agenda and materials review. So we don't have a training tonight. We do have a case and we're gonna have elections, which we will get to for sure. Are there any adjustments we want to make to the agenda? All right, we can move forward. Now we need to approve the minutes from last month. Were there any adjustments or changes that we'd like to make before we move to approve? We accept the agenda or the minutes as approved as given to us.
Second that.
All in favor? Okay.
Aye.
All right, comments from board members and liaisons. Anybody want to start? I'll go. Okay, this took a lot of time. That's all.
Oh, the case review.
The case review, okay.
I didn't.
Yeah. I don't have anything else. Just this took a lot of time.
The police commission met last week. It was a productive meeting. The policy I tried to bait all of you with just to get it, to see if I could get a reaction, I think was discussed and really good engagement on the part of the department. I was really impressed. I know he's sitting somewhere in the room, but Chief Skinner, I just thought it was the discussion was healthy and good around the use of these impact asps and batons in a protest situation, in a crowd control situation. And it was pointed out that there are a lot of policies regarding protests, and it just seemed like a little bit of a ambiguity around the prohibition against passive resistance, use of those on passive resistors versus controlling a crowd. And they're going back and but I was impressed by the responsiveness, and otherwise I conveyed that we met. We talked a little bit about the training that we got about the pursuits, and that is the liaison report from the police commission.
Clay will not be here. But he's working on comments from the case.
He just went out all for it. Too.
Did he? I mean, okay. Are there anything from the liaison?
That's not
No.
right.
He emailed, the email that you have, it just says that I'm working on it.
Oh, I thought that said no. Okay, never mind. I read that wrong.
Rick, go ahead.
I'm not here. I'm all here, but I'm not having any comments.
Okay. I also have no comment. Although I do want to be mindful tonight as we're talking to keep identifiers out of the conversation, including gender, including other things that we are often reminded of. So anything that could put attention on who these people are is against the rules, and it can be bad for us to do that. Oh, we didn't do a land use acknowledgement.
We didn't print it out for you.
Okay.
We can do that. Do we have a break? We don't have a break.
We can just acknowledge that we're on Alapuya land, and
We'll work on that.
we'll work on that for next time.
Can I ask a quick question though, with regards to identifiers, and I mean, I completely understand and support that. Because of the location and the team that they're on. It could make it a little problematic, I mean, it's like what identifiers we
Right.
don't use. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I mean, I think,
We could do a quick exec session before the case review and sort of go through that if you want.
I mean, if you think it would be helpful, I don't know enough about the different teams, and how many people are on the different teams. And so I just think there could be some things that come up that could say, oh,
Okay,
Okay. So after the auditor report, we'll have a quick executive session.
sure.
Lady, or, okay, do you have anything?
Not at the moment.
Okay. All right, so public comments, do we have any public? Here? Or in the internet?
I don't believe so. No,
Okay. Auditor report,
Oh, that came up.
it sure did.
Okay, so yeah, so we're not doing a training tonight and instead we're sort of. So last month I went to council and I talked about my potential ideas for. My ideas for potential changes to the oversight system. Finally got that order right. So, and I didn't actually really talk to you all very much about it or at all beforehand. So that's kind of what we're doing for our training tonight, is just having a longer auditor's report. So you got the 2 months worth of auditor reports in your packet. Those are pretty standard. How many complaints we're dealing with? If you have questions on that, I'm happy to answer those, but I'm not planning to focus on those. What I've prepared is kind of just to go through what I talked to council about and then let you guys know what the next steps are. Get some feedback. I want to be clear, these are, so basically, I'll go into it. In May of last year, council had requested that I come and give a presentation on history of our oversight system and the current structure of it. Just as sort of a grounding in what we already do and why. So we did that. At the end, there was a motion for me to come back with recommendations for potential improvements to the system. So I've been working on that. They are like, it's a very strange request because it's not a strange request. It's a difficult request to fill because they wanted my ideas. I am independent of the rest of city government and we can't act on any of this without input from stakeholders, including the rest of the folks in the city government, right? So these are my ideas, but they're not vetted by anybody. I did, however, I let the chief know what I was working on. We've got word me right now, but it's true. And I've talked to the union about them as well. So this, I wouldn't say that there's buy-in, but they definitely know that nothing was a surprise, just to be clear. So I have slides, but they were more for folks who don't really know the system and you guys know it pretty well. So I don't think that we need to really go into all of that, but I would like to go through sort of what I suggested. And if you have questions, we can talk about those. Does that make sense? Does that sound good?
are any of these suggestions things that could go to a vote since this whole process was formed?
Like a charter
Yeah.
amendment? No.
Okay.
I did not touch the charter.
Okay.
In my opinion.
Okay.
Okay. So the 4 things that I kind of focused on were 1, renegotiating the protocols, and these are in a different order than what I gave to council. So if you watched that and this is confusing, good Lord, did anybody watch it?
Didn't know what was happening.
Okay, good enough. No, that's good, because I didn't want to have, that would just be repeating everything and that would be boring. Okay, so the first thing is going through the protocols and renegotiating those. So as you all know, we have the charter, which sets up the system. And also so there's authority set out in the charter for the auditor, and there are authorities that are specifically retained for the city manager, right? And so what I looked at, I didn't look at anything that would impact her authority as city manager. I only looked at things that I felt I had the authority to do under the charter code or charter language. The code is the city code is what implements the charter, and to change the code would require an act of council. There's one of those basically. And then there are the protocols, which were negotiated between our office, EPD, and the police union in 2007. So that's actually even before the code was finalized, because it got changed again in 2009. So I see some things that could be updated in there. It's been a long time, right? And I'll go through all of those, but that's the first one. That's probably procedurally the least complex, and that's why I'm talking about it first here, although I didn't talk about it first. The second one was improving the administrative investigative response to deadly force incidents. Mark talked about this for years. I'm still beating that drum. The IFIT system was created at the same time that our office was created, and we don't, the systems, they don't mesh together very well. IFIT isn't asking the questions I would ask. They're interested in that. That's okay. That's their mandate, but I don't have oversight over that. So looking at how we do the administrative sort of follow-up to that criminal investigation is something that I would want to focus on. Those are two things that I would love to have council input on. I would love to have CRB input on. Those are things that, in my opinion, we can work on as staff, right? So I can work on that with EPD and with EPEA, and we can move forward without really any code change or anything like that. The two next things would be a little more complex and require council action. So one would be involving the auditor role and use of force boards. I should say this one's questionable. The code says I am required to be allowed to participate in use of force review boards. The policy and the protocols say that that is a non-voting role, right? So basically the way I treat it is I still talk, I still participate. And then how Mark and I did it was we would just write a separate memo to ensure that our point of view was reflected somewhere, right, in the record. And then it ends up being sort of similar to what you see here, right, where there's an adjudication recommendation, and that procedure, it's from a use of force board, and it talks about what the use of force board discussed, and then usually our office submits something separate, right? So basically, I'll talk more about that, but that would require, that's going to ruffle some feathers, and so it's a bigger change. So we'll talk more about that. And then the other one would be potentially expanding what I see, expanding the auditor role into looking at hiring practices, promotion practices, training practices. So this is not where we would have, someone from our office like sitting in hiring panels or telling EPD what to do. That's kind of not what I envision at all. It's more of I see it in the looking at police practices and reporting on trends part of our mandate, right? So it's, how do you guys do this? Can we offer some input? Can we offer some, have some more official avenues for the conversations that sometimes I'd like to have? Is that an accurate way of putting what we talked about?
Yeah, I think Lee and I have been in dialogue around kind of what the term to audit means. And I use that in for instance, if you're in an educational environment, oftentimes what auditing means from any level of oversight is to be able to sit through the class and watch how it's being presented and whether or not the learning objectives are being met. And so there is maybe some space for the auditor to, from a transparency perspective, to have exposure to different things that are, I think, of a matter of public interest, to be able to speak to those things when questioned, and be able to say, yeah, I've sat through an entire cycle of hiring and can speak to the level of questions they're asking and who's sitting on the panel, and have been able to offer any input or insight that they have. So I just see it as a legitimacy and a transparency opportunity.
Thank you, because thank you. I appreciate that. So I'll go into some of these a little bit more. Does anyone have any questions right now? Okay, great, I get it. Okay. So protocols, I sort of discussed how we ended up with what we've got right now. And the areas that I would like to focus on, I just changed my slide, would be number one is the mediation program. I want to make it more effective. I want to make it more usable, so people use it more, because I think it's a really good opportunity, and it's just not something that has historically been efficient or necessarily effective. So I've been talking to folks a lot already about how do we get a new list of mediators? How do we agree on who can do this? We've tried different things, like where one time, I was the named complainant and Ryan did the mediation. We're trying a lot of different things. We may not do that one again. But trying a lot of different ways to make a mediation system that is efficient, that hits all the high points and allows for that conversation and that sort of mutual education to occur, because I think it's a really ripe opportunity. The second thing that I would be interested in looking into is what do we do when there's a disagreement on adjudications, right? Like, obviously, we have a practice that we're working through right now. And I appreciate the chief coming to talk about these ones where we have this issue. It doesn't come up that much, but when I look through the historical stuff, this was a question back in 2009 when they were revising the ordinance. It would, it's always been an issue of what do we do when there's a disagreement between the auditor and the chief? We all know that the chief has adjudication authority. And that's not something I'm interested in even looking at changing. It's more, how do we address it? And I think having a process or a procedure in place that's out there in the public documents, right? Like in the protocols, could be helpful for the community as far as, because nobody knows. And so there's this feeling of just, it contributes to a feeling of maybe toothlessness in the oversight system, which I don't think is true. But having the answer out there for folks, I think would be helpful. Another area is potentially looking at the classification categories that we have set up. This gets really kind of, I'm talking about my feelings and stuff, so I apologize for that, but sometimes there's cases, like there's definitely cases where I'm looking at it and I think, oh my gosh, I have no idea what they were thinking, and I question lots of things, but there's sort of the outlandish ones, right? The shock and awe allegations. And then there's the ones where I think there was a mistake. And I would love to just have a conversation and be like, hey, what were you thinking? Because I would really like to know what you were thinking. And I can't get there without being like, you violated this policy in this way on this date. And it feels very confrontational. It puts people on the defensive. It doesn't necessarily it's not an easy setup for actually changing behavior. And so that's sort of one of the things I want to look at is there a way to not violate employment law to protect the workers' rights and also get all the questions answered that the community would need answered, but not have this sort of antagonistic setup. Another thing that has come up here before is good cause, timeliness. So right now we have the timeliness limits. I'm not looking to change those. That would require a code change. I would love to have a little more flexibility in what is good cause. Right now, basically, we look at good cause as if they're in a coma and cannot file a complaint, then that's good cause, but they didn't file a complaint. But certain other things, like maybe they didn't know, like they didn't have access to the police reports until a certain time. Like that's a harder thing, right? Whereas, and a lot of people don't know there's a mistake until they get those documents, right? Or until they see that video. So that's one thing I'd like to look into more. Another one is public comment at CRB. Obviously, some of you have lived through this, where we have folks come and they are prepared and they want to talk about the case that we're talking about that night with very good reason. And we aren't allowed to let them talk about it. So one thing we've talked about with CRB leadership is having on those times, like public comment later in the night after the case review. Like, I think there are ways around the concern that we had when this bill was set up, that public comment would influence CRB review of the case, right? So we have some possibilities there. And then the last one is kind of, I don't know, it feels a little simple, but it's obviously not when there's a negotiation involved. But investigation timelines have just changed in how we function over the 16 years since these were written. Our preliminary investigations take longer. We have access to video that they didn't even conceive of back then. We watch reports, we do all this stuff. All right, so just looking at action, and then also the chain of command. So you'll often notice there are extension requests in the adjudication process. So the chain of command has gotten a little longer, and ours has too, right? And so it's just having timelines that actually are accurate instead of having to ask for extensions and then it drags it out for the officer. Nobody really knows when it's going to be finished and all of that. So those are the things I would focus on in looking at the protocols. Yes, I'm gonna stop there. Something else came up recently, but we don't need to go into it. Oh my gosh, I had all those slides. I don't need to talk about those. Does anyone have questions about what I just said?
Yes, not really a question so much. I mean, I think it's a public comment. It's because public comment comes up more often at the community impact cases than the other ones. Has everybody done community impact?
No.
Okay. So it's like, I think that, I mean, we've only done 3 Thinking of
You've
the,
done,
we did the one on the mall where the guy was spraying
that was before me.
toxins, water.
The shooting was not a community impact.
Which one? The bad.
The bad shooting was not a community impact case.
Oh,
It was at Harris Hall, so it felt very
Okay.
important.
and the Chinese student.
Shooting, that was not a community impact case.
Yeah, well,
It was the riots.
right.
Been two.
Oh, okay. So I guess but those other two cases, yeah, they just were such big cases, they felt like it. You know, I'm not sure that there's a way to do, there's not, I don't think there's a way to do public comment at the case that we're talking about before or after that isn't going to not feel right.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
if it's done before, I mean, I know I wouldn't feel influenced by the person because it's like, I'm supposed to go by what's in the binder.
Mhm.
But that's me. I don't, but I, other people might feel like when they hear something, pretty emotional from somebody, that it's going to impact their ability to have the discussion,
Yes.
especially in a community impact case where we're weighing in before the final decision's been made. Then if we sit and talk about it the whole time, and then they get up and speak, I think it could,
That's gonna feel hard too.
I think I think it could be just verbal vomit is the word that comes to mind. I think it could be really hard for people afterwards to hear what we say and why we did what we did. And I mean, because the bad shooting was a perfect example. It was just like, there was nothing we could say that was going to make that family feel any better. And I don't think talking before or after about the case at hand, maybe everybody doesn't know about the case, but anyway. So that's a hard one for me to support changing, just because while I understand it, and maybe it has to do with having a better timeline as to what our cases are gonna be. So it's like, if they know at the May case, we're going to be speaking about something, and now here we are in, we're in March. Yeah, I mean, it's like if tonight we decided in May, we're just talking about this, they have the opportunity to come in April,
Right,
right?
Yeah.
They're not gonna come back in June,
yeah.
so I think maybe we have to just be more creative in figuring out a way for them to feel like they can come and be heard.
Mhm.
But at the case of, I wouldn't be real supportive of having it at the, but that's just my opinion.
Well, my view on that is that there's nothing that unless the family was a witness to the event and did not have an opportunity to provide input at the time of the original investigation by the police and did not have the opportunity to speak at that time, then they should not be involved in any future discussion by the CRB. CRB should make its decision based on the record. It's been established not by someone coming in and second guessing or giving their version of the facts or their opinions about it. That's where you get into the problem, I think, is that you get 4 or 5 people that are basing their testimony at the CRB hearing on triple hearsay and stuff that really shouldn't be investigated unless it can be established. Maybe there's a process where we can use to establish what the completion of the investigation is over. That no further input is going to be put into it, and we're going to go from there.
I think this is helpful for me to hear, and I think we can continue to work and think about how to look at this and how to do it in a thoughtful way that
Right.
that isn't.
I think, people need some kind of a psychological ability to
Yeah.
state what they want to state, but it shouldn't affect us.
It shouldn't, but I just know in the cases that we've had, it's been pretty emotional what they say.
Mhm.
And I can set the emotions aside, but
Right.
It's hard.
No, I
No,
understand.
it's very
yeah, I mean,
hard.
but it
Because
is,
even. And in that case, they were limited, right? Like we tried to keep them limited.
Yeah.
So it was.
And
it's-
That's
it
my
was just-
point, is
yeah,
that those
Right.
emotional outbursts are not relevant,
No,
right,
period.
yeah. No, I get that. And I think, but I think we can. Continue to be thoughtful and look at
Right,
this,
yeah.
because this is also something that, again, like. Even if I come in with, this idea over here, it's gonna be negotiated with the union and with the chief and see what people are actually gonna come up with. So I appreciate the input as well, because I think we'll probably end up with something that looks different than what's in my head, right? I'm I acknowledge that. I'm not the one doing it.
People are currently allowed to come and give public comment about a topic that might be like tangentially related to the case we're talking about that night, as long as they don't say in this case.
Right, they are not allowed to give public comment on like the case.
But they can talk about the public handling or the police handling of
Right,
Use of
tasers or
Right,
whatever.
yes, yeah, but we did, I think.
Cause that came up recently, I mean, that came up,
Community impact cases.
No, it came up-
Online.
it came up on Zoom, so
It did.
within the last 3 years. But it was not the public impact, but we did have family come the day of and
Yeah.
give comment.
No, that definitely not. Oh, I remember, well, yeah.
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 I mean, I know what it is.
I think I remember the case.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I think this is, and especially like this group is the best group for me to get feedback from, so I'll check in with you all one-on-one as well, because I think I'd like to get your ideas for how we can move forward, right? The next one I want, and this is something we talked about so much, but is the deadly force investigation. We'll get right into that. And this is again one where I would love to have council input, I would love to have council direction. It's something that can be, that, you know, we can't change infant anyway, right? Not even with council, so. So this is something that I would be working with the chief and with the union to see where we can go with this, right? And so those discussions have been going on for a while and seeing where we can go. So I think having the council direction and the council like, spur is not the right word I'm going for, but that's basically it, right? So, but it's something that I want to work on regardless. So this is why it's the next one. As you all know, if it does it, if it thing, and then we have the opportunity to do admin investigation. This is one of those areas where it's also potentially like going to change a lot during this legislative session. Like I have not, so I just said like a lot. Okay, so IFIT got there was a new House bill last year that changes the requirements for the IFIT investigation and requires them to focus on not just whether the deadly force was justified or was objectively reasonable under the circumstances, but also whether there was reasonable opportunity prior to the use of deadly physical force for the involved officer to consider alternatives to the use of deadly physical force or give a verbal warning. So that is interesting. I think I haven't seen an IFIT investigation that's meeting that standard yet, right? That's occurred since that, and I'm not saying like they haven't met the legal standard. I'm saying that's occurred since that law went into effect. I should be seeing one soon, so we'll see. But so, and then there's a bunch of bills that are this is something that could change over the summer, and I just don't know. In the meantime, looking at what we want from a deadly force investigation and crafting a process that really makes sure to answer those questions and addresses, you know, whatever issues we've seen in the past, I think is a really good use of my time. And I really want to focus on that. And then so that was a little bit vague, but I think you all have seen enough of these to understand what I'm saying. Okay. Does anyone have questions? All right, cool. And then the next one, this is my role voting on use of force boards. This is something that A is very specific and B would likely require council action. And C, I think potentially could be obviated depending on how the deadly force work goes, right? Because right now I do feel like there's opportunity for my voice to be heard, right? I'm sitting at a table, I am participating. I think there is a different weight given knowing that I don't have a vote. But I think that there are ways around that. And if we have a really solid investigation that looks at all of the potential policy issues, that's gonna probably change how I feel like I need to participate or how I need the weight I think my voice needs to have in that use of force board, right? So
Is it a protocol, or is it in writing that you're allowed to be there and participate?
I'm required to participate.
You are, okay.
Yes, and then EVP policy has like a list of folks who are, these are the folks who will be on use of force boards, right? And it includes training and defensive tactics and firearms. And then like the auditor is a non-voting member, communications is a non-voting member, and there can be an EPA representative as a non-voting member. So that's I'm not the only one.
Correct. But I mean,
Um,
but they can't shut you out of the process. I guess that's what I was just trying to make sure is that
No,
you're allowed a seat at the table.
yeah.
Not voting, so.
I think it's one of those, because the code, requires that I get timely notification of critical incidents, including officer involved shootings, and the code requires that I participate in use of force sports. So there's this vision that our office will have oversight over deadly force incidents. And then, because the state bill went into effect the same time that our office, that the city code was written, we end up with no jurisdiction over the actual deadly force investigation itself. Like at the time, our oversight code was written, EPD would have been doing that investigation. So it would have been different. So really, I just want to. It just doesn't intermesh well. And nobody else in our county has oversight, obviously, so it's not something that anybody else is trying to solve. And then the last one, and this one is the one that I think, I want to flesh it out a bit more. It's going to definitely take way in from other folks, and it would be, an expansion of the system is looking at this auditing function. As I say, I do see it as sort of a natural evolution from looking at just complaints to looking at more practices as a whole. And it's a change is hard. I know all of that. But it's something where I think that's some feedback I often get, is just that because we are so complaint driven, we're very, very reactive. And so this is a way that I see to have more of it's not proactive because I'm not weighing in on these decisions. It's more just involvement and reporting out and transparency. So that's that. And then the other parts that I've talked about with council, and I do want to discuss with you all, because this is the first one, because it comes up all the time. Discipline, we talk about it here. We don't talk about it here, and that's what we talk about here. But it's something that comes up all the time. It came up during the pay stuff in 2009 as well. And so, why does the auditor make recommendations on adjudications, but not on discipline? And so it's difficult in Oregon. We are a state that gives a whole lot of deference to arbitrators. We are, I don't know, it's just different. Discipline is different. It is difficult. Right now, I should say, to be clear, I don't know how much you all know about this because we don't talk about discipline here. There is civilian input into discipline where the Employee Resource Center creates a list of comparables. Like once something is sustained, the ERC comes up with these are comparable corrective actions from across the city. And so that gets, and then they consult with the supervisor, and that's how that goes. There are a lot of potential methods for civilian oversight to have input into discipline. There's disciplinary boards. There's what I see as potentially the simplest one, where we would just make a recommendation like we do in adjudications. That actually came up during pre-org as well. I am not willing to make a recommendation on whether I should be giving input into discipline until I talk to more people, right? Like I can't make that just from me. That involves city attorney, that involves, anything would need to be crafted so the city manager's authority to discipline her own employees is not impinged. It's just really complicated, and I don't think that should come from me. So that's what I told council. And then I also discussed some of the recommendations from the ad hoc committee, and just sort of why I'm not on board with some of those. So first, I gave them an update on, there have been several EPD policies that have been updated since the last time council was updated, with police commission input. So I think that was chemical incapacitance, force response reporting, de-escalation, and personnel complaints were all weighed in on with civilian input from the police commission. So there's that. And then body worn cameras. K9 units now have body worn cameras that they can wear even though they're getting called in from home.
No, I'm laughing about that. I'm just
I
thinking
was like, what's
bouncing dog.
Yes, the dog had,
camera.
no, the dog had cameras. Ooh,
Oh, did you say canine?
I meant.
Oh, you mean they? Oh, I thought you were talking about the dog itself.
A lot of pictures of fire hydrants.
Hey, sorry.
No, now I have goals. Now I have new goals.
Okay.
We're gonna get GoPros on the dog. Okay, SWAT, as you, well, SWAT still doesn't have body cameras, so, and there's a lot of different reasons behind that. But I will.
There'd be a lot of muting if SWAT had cameras, so.
Muting has been addressed through directives and training, but not the policy change. That's the other thing. So that was something that came up at ad hoc as well, and I was just updating folks on that. And then I did talk about, let's see, a lot of different things, but the ad hoc committee had a lot of recommendations that would require sort of a wholesale change of the oversight system, and I don't endorse any of those because I think that in essence, the system that we have works. I think it has a lot of strengths. I think there are a few things that could be shored up, but I don't sign on to anything that, that changes the structure entirely. I think we were set up for a reason to be a group that looks at EPD investigations, and doesn't do its own investigations. I think when I look at systems where the civilian office does its own investigation as well, I think it's duplicative. It's expensive. It doesn't necessarily result in anything different. So I don't endorse those. I don't sign on to those. They had a recommendation about extending timeliness for complaints. I don't think that we need to change the code. As I said, when I look at the sort of problematic complaints over the years, I think they would all be addressed through a more expansive idea of good cause, right? I don't think we actually need to change those timelines. They wanted to make a rule that no current or former EPD members could be on the civilian review board, and they also wanted a quorum of this group to be from marginalized groups. Both of those would require a code change because the code is very specific about CRB membership. And the code right now prohibits current EPD employees or family members. It also provides that appointments, it says appointments specifically will not be on the basis of constituency or representation. And then it sets out the selection process, which is, we're going through it right now. It can be onerous at times, where the auditor and the mayor come up with this group of folks to serve as a selection subcommittee and make recommendations to council. So like in my experience, I can't see that group and or council appointing like a former EP employee, right? Because one of the code requirements is that they look at demonstrations of bias or appearance of bias, right? So they really want folks like you all who are wonderful. No, so I didn't sign on to any of those as well. There was a recommendation that CRB get a stipend. And I said,
Yes,
currently no boards or commissions.
I'm
receive
happy
a
to
stipend.
volunteer.
Right. I just
For the
said
record.
that would be a citywide thing and not just us. I'm not going to single-handedly change the city system. Plus, if we are the only group with a stipend, oh my God, we will get all the applications. Okay, I didn't even think about that.
Well, that wouldn't be bad either.
And then one of the recommendations was around giving the CRB subpoena power. I've never seen this. In my 13 years, the CRB has never complained about the quality of an investigation. Really, we're gonna talk afterwards. I don't remember there being a problem that would be solved by the CRB having subpoena power.
No, that's a different.
Okay,
Yes,
we'll talk.
I'll agree with that.
Because I question that. Okay. And then in a community impact case, if the CRB thinks there's information that's lacking, they can send that back. So it's
But we can. You can say that there needs to be more investigation.
in a community impact case, yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. So that's what I'm saying is I don't think the CRB needs to have its own subpoena power.
oh, you were still talking about the same thing. Sorry, I thought you went to, got it. Sorry, I wasn't trying.
Yes. Are you listening?
As well as I should.
Okay, I'm talking. I already talked about independent investigation. Oh, and then there was the recommendation that the CRB get adjudication authority. I don't endorse that at all. That's a charter impingement of the city manager authority and also the oversight authority. That would be a charter change, a code change, all kinds of change. Charter change would require a vote of the majority of the city, by the way, just to be fair. I don't think I said that. Yeah, and also violates principles of labor and employment. I don't sign on to that. I don't need to list all the reasons why.
San Francisco tried it and it
Yeah.
cost them millions. And
Yeah.
they got, I think they adjudicated 12 cases over 2 years or
Right.
something like that. It cost them $18 million.
It's not a realistic thing to me. So yeah, so I don't sign on to it. So next steps. Oh, so
Can I
many.
ask a
Hmm,
quick
yes,
question?
you can.
Has there ever been a situation that IA has felt the need, that they needed more power to get somebody to talk to them? I mean, so I mean, I can't imagine us thinking of a need to subpoena
No.
somebody unless there's ever been a case where EPD has, in their IA, has said, we can't get this person to come forward and talk to us.
So I only recall one employee refusing to answer questions about allegations listed against them. And what happened was we walked out the door, we wrote additional allegations of insubordination for each question that they were refusing to answer. And then they were terminated. Like, that was discipline, never mind, I won't say that, but, and then they sustained on all of those right away.
Huh.
So,
Well, it'd have to be a criminal investigation for the
Yeah.
subpoena powers anyway.
Right,
But it really isn't, it
Right,
wouldn't do any good.
I mean, it's not like we're Congress or anything,
Very
but I just didn't know if, not necessarily a subpoena, but if there was ever a time that you felt like you didn't have enough ability to get somebody to talk to them.
No, I mean, there was only one case where we had an employee who was retiring within a week of the allegation coming out, and I typically try to do all my work ahead of time, so I know what questions to ask.
Sure.
And because I knew he would never come back afterwards, and they would never come back. So that one, I missed some stuff on it because I didn't know what I needed to ask until I found out more information, but that was the only time I ever felt like I didn't get what I needed from somebody.
Right, and members of the public as well.
no.
I mean, sometimes you can remind them because they don't give you.
Yeah, no, I think members of the public, that's probably a little different. I don't know that I always get everything I need from them, but again, subpoena power is not gonna do me any good.
Right.
I think,
It's an
yeah,
internal investigation, there's nothing criminal about it.
Right,
and I think honestly, yeah, no,
okay,
yeah.
I think my question about this is we have, in my time, my 6 years on the board, we've always had a really thorough people doing your job.
Mhm.
If that wasn't the case,
Then we'd have to do ours harder.
okay, so
Yeah.
that's where I would see that coming up, is if
Yeah.
we're looking at these investigations and we're like, well, they're not asking the questions, like,
Mhm.
you know, that could potentially be the case.
then we open
Well,
an internal,
so
and
that would
we
be-
start an
Yeah.
allegation against
Well,
the
no,
IA
So
investigation.
how, and so I guess my question is, does your
sit
office,
down.
does your office have any say in, like, who is doing Ryan's job?
Well, that would be
No.
part of the, I mean, this fourth one you're talking about.
Right, that
is
would be an expansion.
hiring, training.
Well, and that would also be me actually
Promotions.
interfering in promotions that well, not promotions, but assignments. Anyway, no, I don't have any official input into who is in IA.
Mhm.
However, I think our approach has always been to have a very collaborative relationship with the folks in IA, and so I see that as our job, right? Like to help make sure those investigations are thorough and we do it from the beginning instead of waiting, you know.
Yeah.
If it gets to you and there's a lot of things that you wish had happened, then I'm not doing my job right. I wouldn't say that necessarily reflects on IA.
Sure, that
And
makes
then you
sense.
can tattle on.
So
me.
that, I agree, there's no reason for us to have subpoena
Yeah.
power because we have these other checks in
Yeah.
line before we get there.
Yeah.
And I was clear that I haven't, I like all of the IA people who have done it.
No, I wrote
so far.
that
It's
down.
been thorough, it's great. I mean,
I just want to add, I think this is the first case that I've seen where somebody interviewed referenced the auditor's office in a like, how do we frame one of the officers explicitly talking about? How do we frame this, Leah?
What do you guys remember? Cause I mean, I don't know. I mean,
Like, this is the first time that
Yeah.
I've seen it, I think outright say like, and now you guys are here and now I'm in trouble.
right. Oh, yeah, no, that's normal.
So I mean,
Yeah.
this is, I was just, I can't see needing that because I've never been at a lot. I've always been at the point where I don't have enough time to review all of the information, so I
Yeah.
think.
You don't want more?
I don't want subpoena power personally.
No, that's, I hear you. I get it. I do. And I do think that fundamentally that came from looking at other people's systems and other systems that where the CRB does want subpoena power without necessarily, I don't think that was necessarily a reflection on our system,
Sure.
right? I think it came from other places.
Congress could say, you know, why can't we? So I mean, that's what I.
That was
Hear that.
exactly what happened. Yeah. So, So going forward, what I've talked to the mayor about, what we're trying to work through on the schedule, because this is, I'm warning you, you might be seeing me a lot at council, and I'll try to keep you all updated, so I don't forget to tell you when I'm going, but. Hopefully looking at one work session on protocols and where those are and what we can do. One work session on deadly force investigation. And then one on what I call, I can kind of loop both of those under a potential expansion of the auditor function or the auditor role. And then we also are about to write our annual report and go present on that. So that's 4 work sessions, and I'm not good at math, but I know that that's true, and that's a lot. So we are, believe it or not the only thing that council has going on. So I'm hoping that maybe we would have 2 before the summer break and maybe 2 after, but I'll keep you all posted on that. And I would, like I said, I would love to have your input on and your thoughts on where this is going, but that's what we talked about. And then I talked to them about the improvements underway, but I talked to you guys about those like a million times, like about the portal and the new office and blah, 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 blah. So I'm not gonna do that to you again. Yes, Alan.
I think Carolyn makes a really good point. The investigations are so thorough and robust. And the role of the CRB is to assure this transparency and robust process, and we get it. And they're so thorough and robust that there's not, I find myself completely frustrated by the lack of any knowledge around discipline. And I've been thinking I'd be willing to give up the names of the officers to hear something about priors and what happens after, because I feel a little bit like, yes, what we do tests and we come up with issues but I mean, it's a really good process. And so I think we're falling short because we have talked about this. We could be talking about an officer and considering a complaint of politeness or use of force or whatever it is, and not know that individual has been 4 times impolite since COVID started, 2 sustained, 2 not sustained. You don't know what happens, and I just find like I don't care about the identities. We're tripping over ourselves, not trying to reveal identities. I don't care who it is. It doesn't really matter, but I want to know that the role of CRB should be to improve, to make sure that we have good officers, men and women that are being monitored and then performing, and then when there's problems arise, that the process works. And I think there is a role for us to expand the board into just taking a microscope to the investigations. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
I do think, like, as I've thought about that, I wonder too, because I guess there's an aspect now, like where if you got the discipline right now and you were critical of it, hypothetically, and often the chief is not here. I mean, we would be criticizing the decision of someone who's not in the room, right? And so I wonder if that's just something to tie into if there's an auditor function somehow in the disciplinary process, whether that's a board or a recommendation or whatever that could look like, that sort of naturally goes to then the CRB judging the auditor and the auditor's recommendation again, right?
You can have the best investigation, but it could be the best stellar gold standard, but then if for whatever the motivation of the department, it's not disciplining officers for whatever the reason, then it doesn't matter that it's a good, this is irrelevant that it's a good investigation, because if nothing happens, nothing happens. And so I just find personally a frustration from not having any clue. You raise a good point. I think we could learn discipline after. It doesn't have to be part of the packet. I mean, there's lots of, there's options, and I'm not, you're talking about brainstorming and.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I'm just riffing on what you're doing, but I'm not making a suggestion. I'm just expressing something that after 18 months, like, that's my frustration with what we do, because they do such a good job.
I think there's something to be said about depersonalizing what we receive. I don't think that's a terrible idea at all, because I'm going through my packet and actually scratching out the last names to keep myself accountable, because, we all come here after work and we're tired and we want to do right by the people who we're speaking about and weren't in the room, like you said. I'm not pushing back, but it is interesting how like some kind of personal information counts. Like not their name, but like the history behind it. I'm not disagreeing with you. That's kind of a question that I've been reflecting on my time here is what kind of information is relevant? What are the reasons why that's relevant? If I don't have access to discipline, maybe it's a personal problem and I need to go compartmentalize it somewhere else, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth having some kind of discussion about it.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say this, I won't belabor it, but the decisions about discipline are affected by much more than whether there's a violation of policy. There are lots of things that the administration has to deal with in dealing with discipline. And those are far outside of our bailiwick. Union contracts.
Yeah.
Laws reflecting on labor situations. The bundle of laws regarding public employees is just staggering. So it's not something we need to get involved in. And I don't think it should be part of our bailiwick.
I agree. I mean, I think just even having the report that you said gets made up of previous discipline that gets,
Comparables, yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think even, it's like if that's was given to you on top of how many cases do you have a year? 200?
A lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's like your office would have to get expanded. And I don't see the value in it.
Yeah.
I mean, all of the things Rick says, I think the better use would be involved, if there was a way to involve yourself in the promotion process or the placement in, not different departments, but I guess, yeah, assignments. Yeah, because it's like, if there's somebody who has, and obviously, many, I would think, giving promotions, knows that somebody has a lot of impolite allegations, they're not, you would hope, gonna put them as a downtown patrol. Right?
Yeah.
You would hope, but I think, to me, it's like having that extra set of eyes kind of reminding you, it's like reminding them, and it's like, hey, we saw this quite a bit, and, but maybe that's just something that gets done by statistics. But I think that would be a better use of the auditors, input is into, training promotions, having more of a seat at the table as a discussion. I mean, kind of almost like, it's like when somebody gets a reference call, it's like one of the reference calls should always be to the auditor's office, of the department, That.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. No, we can continue to talk more. None of these are, yeah, they're all still in the baby phase. Embryo phase or earlier, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, we can talk more. But yes, that is. No, well, that is the auditor's report. on that
Thank
note.
you.
Thank you. That was robust.
Thank
That was
you.
robust.
Thank you. You got to hear from me a lot tonight.
I'm glad you put yourself at the beginning, so we got to you.
Yes,
Now we're gonna do the executive session.
yeah,
So do we stop recording? What does that
yes, so
mean?
we stop recording.
Case review section into sections rather than just case review. We're gonna have it like normal, where they'll read to us about the case, and then we'll do the intake classification. We'll do the policy and training, and then before we get to adjudication, we'll invite the chief to join us at the table to share thoughts. And then we'll get to our adjudication recommendation or discussion. And if this works, this is how we'll do it when the chief is present. And if it doesn't work, then we'll try again a different way. And just for my clarity, and everyone else too, probably, when we're discussing these things, we often will ask Brian or Leah or somebody. Could we also ask the chief in this if there's a question that would be directed
I
toward
mean, I
the chief?
think ask. We haven't talked about this. I haven't talked to him about this. I mean,
Would you prefer to wait until it's your time at the
No,
table?
I'm here at your disposal. And that's, I mean, oftentimes as you guys are having conversations, I find myself wanting to insert myself anyway. And so if it if the rhythm is right, I'm happy to answer the question as it comes up.
We're still learning. Okay, let's hear about the case.
All right. So we've got allegations of improper arrest, preliminary investigation, judgment, and truthfulness. So here's the summary of the facts. So Officer A and Officer B assisted City of Eugene Park staff at a city park. While patrolling, Officer A and Officer B arrested and transported involved citizen from the park to the Lane County Jail. While at the Lane County Jail, Officer A and Officer B observed a scratch on their marked Eugene Police Department patrol vehicle. After the scratch was discovered, Officer A called Lieutenant C and informed him or her of the damage. Lieutenant C instructed Officer A to document the damage in the vehicle log. After Officer A and B cleared the jail, they obtained a $827.20 repair estimate for the from an automobile collision repair center. And then Lieutenant C didn't request an estimate. So then Officer A and Officer B determined that the damage was caused by involved citizen when he or she was in their custody. Officer B authored a probable cause affidavit and charged involved citizen with criminal mischief 2. So Lieutenant C reviewed the incident and questioned the validity of Officer B's assertion that the damage to the vehicle was caused by the involved citizen. Lieutenant C reviewed Officer A and B's body-worn camera footage from their contact with involved citizen. Lieutenant C's review determined involved citizen did not cause damage to Officer A and Officer B's vehicle. Lieutenant C contacted the City of Eugene prosecutor and requested the criminal mischief charge be dismissed. Lieutenant C entered the incident information to a Eugene PD database, which initiated the internal affairs review. During an IA interview, Officer B stated he or she did not review the body-worn camera footage after the involved citizen's arrest. Officer B acknowledged that after reviewing the materials, the scratch was on the vehicle prior to the involved citizen's arrest. During his or her first internal affairs interview, Officer A stated that he or she remembered the involved citizen had a piece of jewelry, necklace on, and he or she, the involved citizen, rubbed up against the marked unit during the arrest and damaged the vehicle. During Officer A's second IA interview, Officer A reviewed the body-worn camera footage and acknowledged the involved citizen did not cause the damage. So then here are the allegations for Officer A. So that Officer A assisted in the arrest of involved citizen for criminal mischief 2 without first establishing probable cause. And then preliminary investigations, Officer A failed to conduct an adequate preliminary investigation into involved citizens' alleged criminal mischief. Judgment that Officer A failed to use his or her training, experience, and observations to make sound and reasonable decisions when he or she reported to his or her supervisor that involved citizen had damaged the PD vehicle. And then truthfulness that Officer A failed to provide an accurate account of his or her interaction with involved citizen when his or her Officer A's first internal affairs interview was conducted. And then for Officer B, same without the last one. So arrest that Officer A arrested involved citizen for criminal mischief 2 without first establishing probable cause. Preliminary investigations, Officer B failed to conduct an adequate preliminary investigation into involved citizens' alleged criminal mischief. Judgment that Officer B failed to use his or her training, experience, and observations to make sound and reasonable decisions when he or she made an incorrect statement in his or her police report. So then when we come over to the allegations, I won't read them all line by line, but you can see that everyone agrees except in that one in the bottom right. For Officer A, and then for Officer B, agreement on the first 2, and then on judgment, order sustained, and chain of command and the chief were different. And then, of course, here's our usual slides with the issues for the discussion. And I won't read those, we've covered it. And then here are the materials that we provided for y'all. I won't read them. Familiar with them. And then that is it.
You need a new picture.
I know. I was just wondering who would catch that. Trained investigator.
That's me. All right, so with intake classification and monitoring, Jose, do you wanna start us with that one?
Patient monitoring. I think one of the things that I wanted to mention, I already did, which was that there's an incredible amount of information to this. I'm not sure I got to all of it. Yeah, I would like to just assert the quality of the investigation, not just by the amount of information, but by the specifically the struck by let me, it's the top of this document. By the interviews that Sergeant Nelson conducted.
Yeah, I think the intake was very timely. And how quickly everything kind of got brought forward. And the adding allegation, I think was also done in a timely fashion. I think what was really striking in this one is the fact that we had the transcript of the interview. And it was like, after reading the summary prepared by IA and then seeing the transcript, you realize how fortunate we are in the investigations that we get. I mean, it's just like, there wasn't anything that was in the interview that I didn't feel like was well stated in the report. And so I always appreciate, the amount of information we get in there, and how thorough it seems. And, but it's like, I guess until you actually see the actual transcript, you really don't know how thorough it is. And so I really appreciated that. I think this was probably one that it's like, there was so much stuff. There were a couple of times I almost wish I had a timeline of different things. And the two officers, it was like the questions that were put to the two officers, it's like, okay, was it Officer A that said there was a walk around of the car, of the vehicle beforehand to see that there weren't any scratches, but Officer B didn't? Or was it Officer B or was it Officer A? And then there was in for the adjudication, one of the chain of command indicated that there was, that both officers said that they had done the walk around. So there were times where there were little things. But it was those little things that became super important in this one, especially with regards to truthfulness. Because if only B walked around and did the walk around, then Officer A saying there weren't any scratches ahead of time isn't based on a walk around. But if Officer A actually walked around, said that they walked around, and then said there were no scratches, and then the video came out that there were scratches. So I think it was just, there were times where it was like A and B were so alike, that it kind of made that kind of a little disjointed. As usual, I always appreciate the length of service is in these review books, because if this is somebody with 2 years on the force, versus 5, 10, 15 years on the force, I think it's a much different thing that we're looking at. And the length of service being as long as it was for these two officers, really, it really made my decision on this, different than I think it had only been 2 years. So I appreciated all of the thoroughness and the timeliness, and it was a hard case to do quickly because there was so much. I mean, going back and watching the video the day before, all of those things. So
another internally generated complaint goes to Eugene Police Department and the personnel for policing themselves. And then a real commendation to C, who I got the rank. I thought my materials may have said a different rank than you said, but so we won't identify them. We'll just say that C, like I've been a public defender, a city prosecutor, a municipal judge. Like, no one goes home at night and loses sleep over a misdemeanor criminal trespass, like scratch to a car. But C, it bothered C enough that the next day that's what got this in motion, and that to me is remarkable, because these are this is the most oppressed group of, in terms of like, no one really cares, it's misdemeanors, the court's not, they're not going to prison for any of it, and in this case, the city of Eugene is the victim of the crime, and so C stood up for the city and said, no crime, no, and it was dismissed the next day, and to me, that's a very positive, of this whole thing. Thank you.
I agree. I think that the internally generated investigation was very strong in this case. As far as classification is concerned, I think this was troublesome because it was a hard one to classify, because in one case you had Officer B who signed the probable cause affidavit, and Officer A who allegedly assisted in the arrest, which to me means nothing. I mean, are you in violation of policy for standing by and watching your compatriot who's charged with the investigation of the crime, they arrest somebody? That was a problem for me, and I understand that there's a fine line here that the department has an interest in making sure that people do the right thing irrespective of the actual outcome. This individual who was brought in, the suspect, had to go to jail anyway, because he or she did not provide the requisite information to the officers when asked what that name, the identification was. So in order for them to do that, they had to take that person in and get them printed and run through the system to find out what the true identity was. And they only found that out later and established another valid ground for arresting the guy. I used guy, I'm sorry, but therefore, the individual was not harmed in any respect by an arrest for the lack of probable cause to make the criminal mischief charge. Person was going to go to jail anyway, so there's really no harm, no foul on that one. Person was going to go to jail because they lied to the police officer. They had a warrant out. They violated the park rules, and they could have been cited, but they gave the wrong name, and so they were stuck with having to go to jail for that. So I had a problem with criticizing A for assisting in the arrest. And then it was, I got the impression that it got twisted into, well, at the time that they gave their interview, they said that it was probable cause. But I thought that that individual backed away from that position. But anyway, the point I want to make is that the person did it to themselves when they lied to the police officer and didn't. And I know they have a right not to say anything, but they chose to say something. They gave the wrong name. And they ended up in jail because that's the reason that why they went there. They were not charged with the criminal mischief charge for damaging the vehicle until afterwards. That they were not charged with the warrants until afterwards. So I thought that there was a difficulty with the classification on
it. Feels so important to clear my throat. It's what I have to. One thing that I really liked in the investigation was that Sergeant Nelson gave many opportunities for them to view their footage. I counted at least 3 times that you kind of stopped it and were like, do you want to? And you provided them with videos that were helpful for them and everything. So I think that was very well done. Your research was clearly done ahead of time. So I appreciate that. I do have a question. The representation of these officers in the interviews, they seem to take umbrage with how long it was taking. Is that? Can you give insight into, is that normal? Is that?
I'm not sure.
It seems like it was a quick investigation, but they seem to take umbrage.
Yeah, in many instances, and that was brought up during what the Loudermill, what we call our Loudermill hearing, which is our pre-disciplinary hearing that we allowed for them to come and offer any mitigating circumstances that we made. And before the final discipline determination is made. In many instances, council was able to point out that we were well outside the timelines
Mhm.
for many of the steps that we endeavor to meet through this entire investigation. So that was one of many issues that was brought up, was just the amount of time that it took to meet those milestones throughout the investigation. So,
Right. That's what I was seeing in the case file too. So I'm just curious about how that,
Yeah,
what that means
I
and,
think representation, like whoever's representing the employees in there, if there is any kind of timeliness question, they will always bring it up in the interview.
because they're hoping that you just throw it away if,
No, because they're sort of preserving the issue,
okay.
basically.
For
So
appeal.
basically what it does is, I mean, it's not gonna stop any of these questions from being asked. It's not gonna stop the interview. I think everybody knows that.
But this
But
happened in January and the first interview was in May.
right.
Sorry, if the allegation that was the untimely part, or the fact that it took from May until
Both,
December.
both.
Well, the issue is, I mean, so basically, we have 6 months to open, I mean, from the time we should have known, I mean, wait, hold on, sorry. When we get complaints, they need to be received within 6 months of the incident. This was one of those where it was touchy because it got reported, and then we were looking at it, and so it did take time to get it classified and get it moving.
So within 6 months.
Yeah, it was well within that, and it was also, I mean, it was January of 21 was. Times were getting better, but we weren't there yet.
Okay,
January 22.
22, that's what I meant,
Okay, so
21
January
was-
22 is when this happened.
yes,
May
sorry.
of 22 is when the
Yeah.
first set of interviews happened.
Mhm.
then October, that happened,
Yeah,
right?
I don't know, it was July.
Oh, yeah, July.
yeah, I think if I remember
Second
correctly,
week
some of the timeliness things were not around whether or not. And the 6 month window allows for 6 months for allegations to be drawn up on serious misconduct, 60 days for
minor.
minor. This was the timelines that start, like, once the allegations have been delivered to the officer, how much time do you have to actually do certain things? So the 6 month is not the issue here. The other thing that I would point out, which is a little bit different for the CRV and certainly for us, is the fact this may be the first time in the time that I've been here, which is going to be 5 years next month, believe it or not, that we haven't been working directly with EPEA representation, which is much more relational, collaborative, and we're having constant conversations about where the investigation is and some mutual understanding around what the delays are. This is an outside attorney from Portland that's never worked in our system that is questioning these timelines, and I would expect him to do that because he has no experience with how timelines can get extended or some of that dialogue, so.
You started it. Yeah, I was waiting for you to keep going. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
different, I have different comments for a different section.
okay. Bernadette, can you get us started on EPD policies, practices, and training, please?
Um. It's the one area I didn't really look at very much.
Okay.
Is there a policy that requires them to walk around their vehicle ahead of time? Because I guess,
I think it's a procedure. I don't know if it's a policy. I'm not 100% sure,
Okay.
but it's a procedure and a practice that.
most officers do.
Officer would walk around the vehicle in the morning, check their prisoner compartment, that's the procedure.
Sure.
Make sure there's nothing in no contraband or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And. Was the question asked of both of them? Because I felt like maybe I missed it, that. Sorry,
I don't remember that much.
Okay,
detail,
okay.
but it's okay.
because that's, I mean,
I don't know if I
because
asked them
that's where it
both that.
started to kind of hang up for me, is kind of like, I thought Officer A was asked. Because, but maybe it was Officer B did it, and Officer B was saying, but Officer A is very particular that they always do this. Because they're very particular about the vehicle, and so it was one of those things that it was like, I didn't know if it was a policy and procedure, if it's, or it's just, you just think to do it, just like when you get a rental car, you walk around it, because if there's something on there that's like, you're gonna be you're gonna be held liable for it, and are they really held liable for scratches?
No, so damage needs to be documented, though, so
Okay.
they don't necessarily know where it came from. That's, I mean, it can happen.
So we don't know when this damage actually happened. We know it was on the day before. But we didn't go back to see
I
if
did
it
not go
was,
back any further than that. I just documented it the day prior, which that was the most important part for me for this investigation.
right, got it. Okay, that was it. Thanks.
Thanks. I do want to just take a minute and respond a little bit to what Rick said in his round and the last round, and that is that an additional criminal charge can have an implication to someone that's in custody. It could affect their custody status. It could affect their release conditions. And they didn't bring it upon themselves in terms of catching a charge that they didn't do and that there was no probable cause that they did. So I think that, I think that's kind of giving a pass. This person was taken to jail. No one disputes. That's fine. They were properly taken to jail, but they shouldn't catch a charge. No one should ever catch a charge that is, it's not that for which there is no probable cause. I mean, it doesn't change the circumstance. The other thing is simply the training, about writing and attesting to things happening. I mean, it's kind of beyond, it's an obvious statement, but that's my comment about training is that, if you're gonna sign an affidavit of probable cause or that you attest the facts that and it's the second case in a row actually where this issue has come up. So that could be an implication of a training issue. Oh, and the other thing was the completely unprepared nature. I mean, it's not a training issue, but it was shocking how unprepared with representation these officers showed up to their interviews with internal affairs. That it was just no effort at all. That and I would just hope that they're counseled that these are important interviews and that you ought to take them seriously. And but that's neither here nor there.
That was highly unusual.
That was bizarre. Yeah. Thank you. That's it. Thanks.
Interestingly enough, if I can just make a comment about that, going back to the uniqueness of the representation is that particular attorney who represents police officers all over the state says we're actually the only agency he's ever dealt with that allows officers to review body cam footage before their internal affairs. So it didn't even occur to him to have his clients do that. So another little detail that really is interesting when you think about FOP representing employees versus our EPEA representatives. If this had been EPEA, I'm almost assured that they would have sat down, dialed this up and forced their clients to watch that. And in this particular case, that wasn't even offered to them. Having said that, that does not mean that the officers didn't know that was available to them and they did not avail themselves of that option. So I'm not giving them pass on that one.
Okay.
Oh, you didn't get to comment on that yet.
He's-
Oh, I didn't think he had actually said anything yet.
I don't have any
Policies, you don't have anything on policy. Yet. Oh, okay. Got it.
I mean. I would love it if it was a policy that they have to review their body cam before the interview happens, because I think. The amount of time and money that we spend having to go back and do this again. It's just absurd. And
And
if,
also, this is the
if-
only time I've ever seen.
sure, but if it were a policy or even like a strongly worded practice. Directive. It would have been a lot better. Is it, I mean, generally they do.
I mean, and the
I can-
invitation.
I can tell you that with
Yeah.
correspondence with the EPA president, that's what he does with every single employee is they come in 30 minutes, an hour early, whatever it might be, sit down, talk about it, watch the video together and come into the interview with that.
And most officers take advantage of that and do that with them.
It's not really an option.
Okay.
Just because if they had come in that hour early, would they have also known to look at the video the day before?
No,
But you showed that. to
that's
them
why I
last
showed
year.
that to him at the beginning.
Absolutely, but
Yeah.
that's just, sorry, I just wanted to ask that question. Sorry, I just didn't.
Doesn't the invitation wording say like, thank you, what does it say?
Oh. I can't remember the exact verbiage. I cut and paste it every time, so
I
it's
get
pretty
you.
tight.
You're cordially invited.
Please review your reports, be prepared.
Yeah.
I think it actually specifically says body worn video and reports. Don't quote me on that, but it does say review all the material available to you and be prepared for the interview.
Is it commonplace understanding, common sense to be able to, and
Yes.
to review this?
Yes,
100%.
and
Okay,
How much time do
Not
they
the
have
first-
from the invitation to between the
Well, this,
at least 72 hours.
yeah, and
Okay.
this was more than that.
but at least 72, that's the
Yeah.
policy.
Was the video that Bernadette asked about, the video from the day before, available for them to look at?
No, that's why I showed it to them at the beginning of the interview.
Gotcha.
So that they could have that as a reference before they started and then offered the opportunity to talk about it if they wanted to, because it was new information that I provided to them.
Yeah, did you also give them the opportunity to talk with their lawyer, and did he drop the ball there?
Well, I asked them if they wanted a break.
Yeah,
They chose not to.
A
yeah,
couple different times you offered a
Yes,
break.
I did.
And had they looked at the
Okay.
body, had they looked at their own body worn camera,
Right, gotcha.
they would have seen that he wasn't up in this, up in this.
I'm not there to try to trick anybody. I gave them new information and told them if you want an opportunity to talk about it, you absolutely can. And it was, they chose not to.
I think, to quote the chief in their adjudication, it said they should become well prepared and equipped with the truth. And I think had they done that, that would have changed things. And honestly, the thing that really bugs me about this one is that in the end, the only person who was harmed by not being well prepared and equipped with the truth was the person who was not well prepared and equipped with the truth. And it almost ended their career. And I think that is, or I mean, I assume, since we've been told that truthfulness is a career-ending allegation, I don't know if that was. I assume. Why would you not? Because why would you not? Yeah. I don't expect an
There
answer.
was another quote in there about error.
I have one, but I will.
Oh, yeah, there was, I underlined that part too, but I didn't quote it on my paper. Yeah, okay. And that was actually gonna be my adjudication comment, so I'm done for the night, so.
are you sure, Rick? You wanna-
Yeah, I'm done. Sure.
Okay. I've been thinking a lot about, we're in the policies practice. I've been thinking a lot about this truthfulness policy and trying to reread it over and over again. Forgive me, I'm an academic. And specifically, you know, I look at how and why truth is important to as a public interest. And so to me, you know, when I think about this, the way the policy is written is, I think, about as good as it's gonna get when it comes to this issue. Because I don't think that there's a policy that can suss truth out short of inquisition or something. And that's just kind of something that we have to deal with as a community, because that's how language works. That's the nature of speech, right? So, you know, when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about, like, when does an incorrect statement, which is, I think, the language that's used in here, qualify as untruthfulness? I'm conflicted here, and I'm trying to think and work through, as I read this lack of carefulness towards the truth and whether that constitutes untruthfulness. Do we have a responsibility to that, to be careful with the truth? I'm just thinking about this. There's a passage in here that I'd like to quote from, if that's okay, if we have time for that. Page 13 of 17, second interview with Officer A. 3 paragraphs from the bottom. I reminded Officer A, he had described a necklace that had a pendant. They had a neck,
You want me to read for you?
Sorry.
no, that's okay, I just, that they had stated was like a sea urchin sort of metal trinket. I further stated that they had told me how they saw them rub up against the truck with the pendant, and they stated they saw fresh scratches. I asked Officer A if they were able to view their necklace, citizen's necklace, when they reviewed the BWD. Officer A told me they were unable to see the necklace, and then stated, I saw in the video that they had a necklace. I couldn't, Ryan, I don't remember this. I should have watched the video before the first interview. And there's a lot of passages in here like that where it's not that they're being deliberate. I couldn't like empirically prove untruthfulness, but it kind of passes the eye test of untruthfulness that like we don't have a good rubric or criteria for this. And I think that's part of the problem. And I'm not saying that we need to pass something that would give us, concretely this, but yeah, I'm just trying to read about what I see as kind of a lack of carefulness towards the truth and whether or not that constitutes untruthfulness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, we used to have the one of the, at some point in this, and I saw Rick, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But the policy used to say negligently or recklessly, like, on or off duty, like, basically not telling the truth. And it was like, holy cow, that is expansive and probably unenforceable. And so we ended up, there were certain cases where, like, 100% this is a negligent untruthfulness, right? Like, at the very least, right? You weren't careful with the truth. One could argue it's up from there, right? And then the current policy with knowingly or willfully, it's interesting. And then the whole mental state requirement that came into the grievance level, right? Like, I think this is one of those things that comes up frequently of like, we don't have a mental state requirement for most of these violations of policy. When I say that, it's like, does it need to be reckless? Does it need to be willful? Does it need to be willful?
Intentional.
Sometimes it just happens. So I don't know, that's something that, I don't know, comes up quite a fair amount, and Rick, I didn't think about that.
Well, I think that my understanding is, and Alan can correct me if I'm wrong, and Bernadette, anybody else, I guess. You start with accidental mistakes. That's at the bottom. Negligence is not enough to prove failure of truthfulness. You have to have at least, in terms of, for example, defamation, like libel and slander, you have to have at least a willful disregard, which is tantamount to recklessness. Now, there's a sliding scale between negligence and recklessness, and then there's willful disregard, which requires an actual intent to be untruthful. And same with knowingly. Those are the two levels at which this policy is required. You have to knowingly and willfully do it. So the negligence, the accidental, the reckless don't give rise to that level of violation in my view. That's how I view it. And that's how I view the general jurisprudence about that. Now, I may be completely wrong about that, but that's my understanding of it, having been involved in, defamation cases and other things like that. So I don't know. That's my judgment about it.
Can I ask another?
The only thing that I have a question about is then if you look down in C, 103.51.1C, it says employees will not make any false statements to justify a criminal or traffic charge or to seek unlawful influence the outcome of any investigation. What standard is it? It doesn't modify the standard there. It doesn't say what that standard is. It doesn't say willfully or knowingly.
It doesn't, yes.
So that's a problem to
Right.
me. In the policy, and that
Yeah.
was one of the things I was gonna comment on earlier when we were talking about policy, so
Did they carry forward from A or not?
I'm guessing that we'd have to agree that it did, but.
It's a mystery.
It's not outright, it's not explicit.
Where you're gonna face that issue is when someone gets disciplined for it and they sue.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or there's a disciplinary proceeding and it goes to the court, some court somewhere is gonna have to decide what the standard is, whether it's willful knowingly. Or whether it's just
Just to flat out.
make
false
any
statement.
false statement. That's, and the argument would be, is making a false statement mean that you know that it's false? Or whether you actually knew, or should have known.
Or a reckless disregard for truth.
And the should have known part is the negligence standard, which I don't think gives rise to a high enough level, so. I think it's a problem, and the courts will generally say it's a question of fact for the jury.
So for the legal folks in here, is there a precedent for this? For thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, all kinds of it.
Yeah. Did we bring any case law with us? No.
No, do I have any? Driving citations with me, no, but.
I saw that the
Yeah.
chief is shaking.
Yeah,
their head.
ORS 236-350 speaks specifically to just cause with regard to just discipline and identifies the word willfulness in there. And so that's always,
Standard.
that's always a standard that is brought up in some of the, in many of these cases as a follow current ORS around the willfulness. So you can, I think that's a piece of the discussion, but it's one that certainly I try to be mindful of when I put these through my lens as well.
And I think that's correct.
I'm gonna go back to policy. No, with regards to damage. How is damage supposed to be documented? If at the beginning of the shift, officer comes out, sees a dent in the side of the car.
You guys are familiar with the blue team, we've talked about it here before, right? It's a blue team entry
With pictures.
with pictures and then notification to supervisor.
And so, and notification, they're supposed to
It
do
would-
blue chain?
No, I think that's a supervisor. does that one. Yeah,
Supervisor, they notify their
notify
supervisor.
their supervisor and then they
Okay.
would do a blue team.
So at the very least, this would have, upon seeing the scratch, notifying on the phone, that would have gotten the blue team thing going.
Yes.
And so in a sense, officers reported on themselves by calling these scratches to attention. And then the charging and then looking back the day before and seeing that that wasn't there, if it was there the day before. And that it wasn't noted by somebody else previously. Sorry, just talking out loud. You don't have to agree or disagree with me, but that's. Yeah. And. You know, the disregard. You know, with regards to the truth in this one, it was like, it was the doubling down. It was the, you know, it wasn't there before. It was there before. No, that's not the right picture. Oh, I sent the wrong picture. So why do you have another picture? I mean, but it was like, it was done by a zipper. And then it was done by a necklace, a very detailed necklace. And yeah, I mean, I know what inferring, you know, making an inference into somebody's state of mind is, you know, because we can't open up their mind and look inside and see, did they do this intentionally? But boy, there's an awful lot there that I'm gonna make some inferences about, because I just, and the length of time, and I guess I should have watched the video before. You know, if there have been, if there were, you know, I always have questions, right? You know, if there have been some questions that point to ask a question, you know, it's like, have you ever been through an IA interview before? Yeah. You know, have you always reviewed video and police reports before you've gone into there? You know, I mean, it was like, it shouldn't be it shouldn't have to be a standard question asked in an IA interview, because again, then it's bringing up the fact that they had another IA, which I think can get problematic for us to be looking at and thinking about. But at 15 years on the force, guessing that there's been some time where they've been interviewed and what kind of preparation happened on those other times. And it just seemed so flip and like, this is just not a big deal, and just and then it just, yeah, like you say, it's like the amount of time and effort that got put into this. And the question still to me is, did it make an impact on the person that it needs to make the impact on the most?
Feels like we're getting towards adjudication.
Sorry, yeah, I'm not
we
supposed
are,
to talk about
You're,
it, so
no,
it's
but
not me.
you got, you was a good intro. I
It was a
thought.
great
You
bridge,
just had-
but we're not quite there yet because we have the chief's turn.
No, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm happy to share a couple of thoughts about this before you guys talk about. And I may give you the benefit and the gift of being able to talk about me without me in the room, because I'm missing my son's first lacrosse
Oh, no.
game right now. So,
You'll have more.
but this is important. Listen, I've got a 15-year-old and I've got more yesterdays than I have tomorrow's with, and so I'm gonna take advantage of this. So a couple of things, when we think about the adjudication and some of the, for lack of a better word, the disagreement, and you guys have danced all around where my mind has been through this thing. I can't stress enough from my perspective, how frustrating this particular case is and how this could have all been avoided with some simple preparation in my mind, and basic preparation and being able to do that. The other thing that is really, really apparent to me reading this investigation is that Officer A really was the driver behind the majority of what we're reading, and Officer B was along for the ride. And got kind of pulled along. And it's not uncommon when you work closely with another officer. Remember, probable cause, or the sense of probable cause, or the information you grab through a probable cause type of encounter is transferable from officer to officer. A police officer from somewhere else can call and tell me what they believe to be true and accurate, and I can act on that other officer's probable cause. That's a fairly unique thing in our world that we do from time to time. So when I think about Officer B, I often think that Officer B was acting through the shared information that Officer A gave Officer B, or what Officer B believed to be the truth based on Officer A's account of what happened, and kind of got pulled along for the ride on this. Another thing that has occurred to me is that Officer A and Officer B's initial statements. So the very first blush of the initial statements through both of their unprepared or lack of preparedness was largely the same. And what we saw that was so different in statement number 2 is Officer B having a profound awareness and recollection that Officer B was wrong. And conversely, Officer A had this sense of cavalierness and being a lack of being contrite. Although it was pointed out to me that in the second statement, even though it wasn't as maybe sincere as Officer B around being wrong about what Officer A had seen, that there were 13 separate instances where Officer A did in fact admit that they were wrong. So I think about that, and then I think through the entire lens of this is that we're talking about an allegation that could end an officer's career. And what is the standard that I want to have as a chief that would either completely and severely alter a career or end a career through an allegation of truthfulness, and applying also the standard of willfulness based on ORS 236-350, and trying to articulate that either officer, but in this case, Officer A, because of that specific allegation. Is this a sense of officer being willfully untruthful with internal affairs investigators, or willfully untruthful with the way they wrote a report or whatever? Or was most of my angst, or a lot of my angst, around the fact that this officer was arrogant and narcissistic and completely inept at that moment in time, and whether or not that speaks to the truthfulness aspect of this. And where I came to a conclusion was that I didn't have enough evidence to suggest that Officer A had gone down the path of willfully telling a story that they believe, that they knew, or at least remotely believed was untrue in that first internal affairs investigation. And so that's why I landed on insufficient evidence for that particular one. Any other disagreements around Officer B's adjudication was around, for me, a lack of evidence to suggest that Officer B was as informed as Officer A was around certain aspects of this, and was maybe caught up in absorbing Officer A's perception, story, recollection. The last thing I'll say is that it tells me, I always think about the little details, that if Officer A was attempting to be willfully untruthful, then you wouldn't necessarily say things like Officer A actually calling their supervisor and making them aware of what they were doing and why they were doing it, and being so upfront about the scratch, and this is what I'm doing, and this is what I'm arresting him for. Generally, I don't see people who are trying to be untruthful openly just lay themselves out there to be found to be untruthful or to spin a tale openly to a supervisor like that, because I think in the investigation it showed that the officer A immediately called their supervisor, which to tell them exactly, this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it. And that's a little unusual behavior in my experience for officers that are trying to be deceitful. They oftentimes try to fly under the radar and not let their supervisor know they're trying to lie about a thing. So just a little nuance to that helps me try to peel back whether or not there was a sense of willfulness or a sense of knowing or intentional culpable mental state around the truthfulness. And so that's why I did land on the insufficient evidence for specifically the truthfulness piece of Officer A's allegations.
But you did at one time sustain it. It was originally sustained, correct?
The original sustainment, yes, it was. And then it was, I had the benefit. And that's why we do the Loudermill hearing, is that I have the benefit of hearing additional evidence and additional information during the Loudermill to help mitigate what that original adjudication is.
Can you articulate tonight what that additional evidence was? Because I didn't see it in here. I mean, I saw that there were a few things that were raised, but I did not see what additional evidence you had that had you change your.
So a couple of things. Number one was the bright lining of the ORS that articulates the standard of willfulness. I think that was part of it. I think the other piece of this was the pointing out to me, even though it was in the transcript, if I would have been keeping count, the pointing out to me that Officer A in the second interview, in 13 different instances, articulated, even maybe it wasn't as robust as we would like, or as robust as Officer B, but did articulate that they were wrong. And I think the other piece of this is we had, in hindsight, the disconnect for me was that we had Officer A and Officer B tell the same story the first time, but yet Officer A is the one that's being accused of truthfulness and not Officer B at all in the second one. And so the other piece of this is there's some problematic, there's some nuances to this investigation from a process standpoint that were problematic. That is a department issue. And so when I think about sustaining an adjudication, and I think about what I want to do, what I feel like is just and reliable, and that also protects the department from vulnerability, I do think about those things. So I think the opportunity to hear from, and there's other things in that Loudermill that were brought up that are a cause for concern that we need to fix. I mean, there's a timeliness issue, there's all those kinds of things. But I think the one that really, Bernadette, that really struck me was the really challenging me to think of this a different way around whether or not, what was at the moment that first testimony was taken, that first interview was taken, was there a willfulness to be untruthful at that moment in time by this officer, knowing that if the answer is yes, if I get to yes on that answer, that it's career ending for that officer. And upon reflection, I wasn't able to, in good conscience, say that I felt like there was a level of willfulness there, high enough there for me to end an officer's career with an allegation of untruthfulness.
And do you have any concerns, given this officer's ability to make such a tall tale in such a short amount of time about something insignificant, that they aren't going to go on and also just fabricate things to be able to justify another arrest or incident or scratch on the car or ding on the car? I mean, that's where I see this. It's like, this wasn't, I mean, I got to 5 lies. Each of them seemingly insignificant. I mean, just the fact that walked around the car, didn't see any scratches, but then was very sure that there were scratches, that, the damage had to have been caused by this person that they took to jail, had to be done by the zipper. And then it was like the very tall tale of, oh no, there was definitely this sea urchin trinket. Wasn't told to watch the videos. I mean, it's like, that, you know, and that the wrong scratch. Oh, I must have taken a picture of the wrong scratch. I mean, it's like each of these, it's just so sloppy and reckless, and it makes me wonder, why would we want someone out on the streets? Why would we want to be continuing to pay somebody's salary that is this sloppy?
Well, your point is well taken. I think it is sloppy and it is reckless. And there's ways to deal with sloppiness and recklessness in our organization. The piece that I have is, the piece that I have to look at through my particular lens is, and we see this in many analyses of the work that we do, is we try to the best we can, and the courts have tried to the best they can be able to see this through what the officer reasonably perceived at the time when they made either the statement or the action. And if the officer reasonably perceived that what he was reporting was his truth or their truth at that particular time, then there is room there to believe that there was not a willful, at that moment in time, there wasn't a willfulness around telling this tale. Because there's a chance that at the point when the words are coming out of the officer's mouth, that it wasn't a tale to him. Now, having said that, we can all suspect, and we can all do those things. But again, I think the truthfulness threshold should be really high when it comes to this. And there's some of those that we come across that are no-brainers, because it is absolutely a death sentence in our career when it comes to truthfulness. And so that truthfulness should be really, really high in the bar. And I think we owe officers the benefit of trying the best we can to ask the question, what do we believe the officer reasonably perceived at the time when they either encountered something and reacted, or what they were perceiving, or what they wrote in the report. I mean, we just went through this last month with the same type of thing, what that officer reasonably perceived or perceived to be the truth at the time that they wrote the report. This is very similar to that for me around that threshold. And so that's why I landed on insufficient evidence, because I was not willing to go so far as to say unsustained or within policy, but there was a lack of the evidence that could get me to a place where I could say, you're an untruthful officer, and then the outcomes that would come from that.
And you mentioned, I'm sorry, I'm taking up all your time, but you also mentioned that there was the timing, that the overall timeliness of the investigation. I mean, if that would be a reason to dismiss truthfulness, isn't it a reason to dismiss all of them?
No, that was not a reasonable reason to dismiss truthfulness. If you're untruthful, you're untruthful regardless of the timing. The piece that the CRB really is.
No, it was just one of the reasons that you made the point that the overall timeliness was outside of policy.
Well, no, that was just what I was doing, is articulating the things that were brought up in the louder.
Okay.
Yeah, I try to just give you a brief snippet of the things that were raised as issues through the louder mill.
But not one of the reasons.
But not necessarily the reason why I would do that. One of the things is.
Dismissed,
Sorry,
just to be clear.
right, I mean,
Sorry.
the adjudication changed, right, it
Yeah.
wasn't dismissed, but
Yeah,
it wasn't a basis for changing the
Yeah.
adjudication. Okay, sorry, I'll stop talking because.
I want to let you get to your son's game, just really quick, is it fair, discipline's not the purview here, and we don't want to know, but is it in general terms, when we see something like this, A gets a career saving save in a sense, you know, or what you perceive to be the correct decision, that has the effect of saving the career, is it fair for us to assume that A still heard that his chief, the arrogant and the narcissist, you know, the behavior, so I know, because we want to know, you know, that this isn't, you know, hey, you want it, or, you know.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's one that probably needs some time to develop some level of trust with this chief and how he addresses these things within his organization. See, I even talk about myself in the third person, so you don't know who we're talking about. Yes, so the quick answer is yes, is that through the Loudermill hearing, I sit and listen, because that's not my time to conduct a separate investigation. It's their time to be able to do that. And then through subsequent follow-up, there have been times where I have mandated that an individual not only receive their level of discipline, whatever that is, but also some time with me one-on-one. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go around and talk about adjudication recommendations, and then after we talk about it, we'll say what we agree with. Again. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Chief.
I really appreciate it. Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you. So keep an eye on.
Thank you. Ellen, can you start us?
I can, so my observations are that last month we had a similar, the chief just alluded to it, and it was, I used the term safe harbor, Bernadette used another term. Civil compromise, I think, but we saw an officer with a truthfulness allegation be provided an opportunity way after the fact to correct the record. And then there's no longer a false statement sitting out there, and therefore, that person. I'm getting a sense that it's really hard to sustain an allegation of truthfulness because it's career ending. And I just feel like that, I really, I wrote down before she said it, I had said the same thing that Bernadette said. Is this who we want on the street, That's a different, it's not the purview here, but the decision, if truthfulness is career ending, the decision to absolve or find the insufficient evidence has the result of saving the career, and the risks that Bernadette referenced do exist with that person, in my view. You can't ever be sure. And the attitude, the difference, I really agree with the chief, the difference between B's expression of what happened here and A's is night and day. And so I don't know, it's too soon to say. I mean, each is I appreciate that it's difficult to sustain truthfulness, but we have these reports where if I'm wrong, but a probable cause is an affidavit, it's a sworn statement, and it contains a false, something's wrong in it, it's not true. And in this case, it's not true because the things that were supposedly investigated and caused didn't happen. So, it's hard to reach a conclusion that A was truthful in all these instances. I heard what the chief said. I respect what he said. I really respect how difficult it is to tank a career. Must be incredibly difficult. And I guess we have to have faith in the chief that doesn't want an officer out there who would compromise a more serious, it was a criminal misdemeanor, but what about it, if it's a felony? So I said this last month, I don't want to keep saying this every month, but I want to defer somewhat to the decision maker assessing this individual officer and kind of giving that save in quotes and air quotes. That's it. Thank you.
Welcome to public employment. I think decisions are made along the line in public employee settings that are made for other than what you or us or the rest of the people feel are the most important things. And we have no idea what orders the chief has from the city manager or the mayor or the council regarding avoiding liability claims. And the reason that I think that he mentioned the timeliness issue is because that timeliness issue might be something relevant on a secondary look at this on an appeal level. And it could get reversed. And so I think I'm gonna go with the chief on this one. I'm gonna agree with what he did on all of it.
One thing that came up to me going through all this was how I'm always interested in what can happen next. So if there are officers, reading this case or watching this meeting and they see that this happened, does that give them the opportunity to be like, oh, well, then I can just go into an IA investigation and say I don't remember. And then kind of open the door for basically weaponized incompetence. And I think that is not what we want. And I think the chief kind of was talking about this, like, he has to balance what's good for the department with what's like in front of him right then, and I don't want. I brought this up before, I think even last month or the month before. I don't want officers to start thinking that they can get away with things because of loopholes or because of policies being too hard to stick. I'm not saying that that is what's happened here. It's kind of my general comment about where we go from here. I think.
It's the precedent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are the consequences of the policy part of the application of it or the criteria of the policy of truthfulness?
It's a very good question. I think I understand it. So, basically, I try to not let the outcome influence if I'm bringing an allegation or not necessarily, right? So sort of to the point of like when Rick said no harm, no foul, right? This guy was gonna go to jail regardless. That definitely was brought up to me, right, at one point in this, and my thought was, there is a lie in a probable cause affidavit, or an untrue statement in a probable cause affidavit, right? Like, I'm gonna look at that, like, and so to that, like, that sort of outcome, like, yes, I look at, but like, it's sort of like when I look at, no, so I'm just gonna say no, I try to not let the outcome really influence how much.
I mean, it seems like we're willing to like go with the letter of the policy for some things, but the spirit of the policy on other things.
Mhm.
And that doesn't seem like truthfulness is the right place to be doing that.
I hear that. Yeah,
That's
and
frustrating.
truthfulness typically is one of them because the discipline is so huge for it, right? And
So then put it in the policy.
Yeah.
So that
I
at
hear
least we know what we're dealing with or how, you know, like, so that, so at least that we're like, okay, I can't be upset about it because here it is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a policy thing.
Mhm.
If that's the case, then I think that that's like, I mean, I don't know, there's some benefit. At a human level of being that kind of honest, but probably also at like a liability level too, maybe, I don't know. Could be a way of like getting through these decisions quicker.
Mhm.
But I also want to push back on what, you know, respectfully on what she said. She said it's about, you know, the reasonable perceptions of a person's truth at the time. And we all know that memory is unreliable. But this, as I read it, it's not about one statement of reasonable perceptions, but about the sustained recklessness with that.
And that's, so, yeah, I mean, no, nobody asked for me to talk about my adjudication.
It's not against policy to be incompetent,
But
and that's the problem here,
we actually used to have.
right?
Yeah,
Because the competence has nothing to do with truthfulness, or does it? Maybe, again, maybe we should just make that stuff explicit here. Memory, section ABCDF, memory is fallible.
Yeah.
Incompetence, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know, I'm frustrated by also the cognitive dissonance in reading the chief's memorandum. I read the memorandum and I was like, okay, what is this? The 4th page, addressing allegation 4, second paragraph from the bottom, last sentence of that paragraph, given the location of all the scratches, the description of the damage reportedly caused by the person, video evidence showing where you and Officer B were touching, indicating on the vehicle and the photographic evidence from Vic's auto, the photograph taken by you is not the wrong scratch as you claimed. I mean, that's just one lie that was caught here. So to reach the conclusion, I was like, there's cognitive dissonance for me in going from that and shifting to there. I totally appreciate Rick's comment about maybe there's some context here that is above our pay grade. That's to me the only thing that would kind of explain what I'm reading here. And in this sense, I think it's a bad idea to be changing policy in the middle of a process. Change it after the process, but not during it. Yeah.
Rick, while I understand everything you've said when it comes to all the employment law and all the willfulness and knowingly and intentionally, I can't get past the fact that he intentionally kept talking and making stuff up as he went along. And to me, it's like, you know, that's an intentional act to keep talking. If this officer had just said, I don't remember, you know, it's like, you know, we do a lot of these, we take a lot of people to jail, you know, all of those things, any of those things would have made me kind of go, okay, you know, but the fact that it was like, it was so surefire that everything happened. And, you know, it was like, it was done this way, it was done this way. And just, it's like, I mean, at first I thought it was sloppy. And then I was just like, no, it's just like, this officer just is going to say something to make this right. And, I mean, to me, it's just like, did the officer want it to be true? I'm sure they did. But it was just, every time you turn around, there was just another thing. It was like, it's a trinket. I just know it was this trinket, and it looks like sand dollar. You know, I know that they were rubbing up against it, and I knew that they were going to scratch it. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's if I see somebody rubbing up against something that I think they're gonna damage, I'm gonna go, dude, what are you doing? Knock it off, right? I'm gonna look at it right away. I'm not gonna just kind of like think, oh, they're going to do some damage to my car and not stop them. And so that's where I just kind of go, I just can't believe anything they said. And if somebody is that loose with the truth in an affidavit that is gonna hold somebody in jail, obviously they're already going to
He
jail.
didn't sign it.
Right,
Beat it.
right, and that was my concern, is that Officer A is basically, you know, yeah, passing all this off on Officer B, and, you know, it sounds like they work closely enough that it's like, oh, I'll write this report, you write that report, you lodge this person, I'll lodge that person, so we don't all have to do, you know, I don't have to do all the reports, you don't have to do all the reports. I mean, I kind of, I was projecting a little bit from, you know, how I've seen these things go through, but it's, I don't know, I am frustrated with this whole process. I'm frustrated because I think what you say has truth to it, that, you know, we don't know that the city manager is saying, yeah, don't push this issue. It's just gonna be a liability. We're gonna lose on pill, whatever. I mean, all of those things are just so frustrating to me because we see it time and time again. And my dad would roll over in his grave when I say, you know, it's like, this is my problem with unions, but it's like, that's where we've become, is obviously I'm going off on a tangent, so I'll stop. But I just think that it's like, we aren't doing the right thing anymore for the wrong reasons. That's what I feel like. Go ahead.
I'm the one who's actually not supposed to be talking right now, so.
And we should probably move on.
I know, I just want to say this quick, that. Well, apparently it's not quick, it's not, but no, I just the whole IA system, right? The whole basis of my job relies on the fact that we can ask people questions and they have to answer them. And so for someone to come in with this, and I'm not even gonna say lack of preparation, because it is a level of arrogance, it is a level of not caring. And I guess that's the other thing, is the thing that I hear constantly is how stressful this process is for employees, and I agree with it, I see it. And then I see this, I see someone who has zero respect for the process, zero respect for the allegation, can never think they did anything wrong, and that is troubling to me, right? That they didn't even think that they needed to look at their thing to see if they were right, because this couldn't be, and this allegation couldn't be true, right? And so that worries me. That's someone who maybe isn't checking before they go to court, right? Like, that's someone who I think not being careful with the truth is a good way to put it, but I think it's worse than that, right? And so anyway, I had my opportunity to write down my opinion, and I don't need to belabor it now, but it just
Well, and like throwing the supervisor, it's like, well, you know, this is a retaliation. I'm like, what the heck is that coming from? So to me, it was just, it was the piling on of things led me to be able to say, yeah, I can't open up his brain and see, but it was like, I have no doubt in my mind that they knew exactly what they were doing when they were just telling stories. Because they thought the story would be good enough to get us through.
I have comments from Clay, that Clay shared. So this, for the record, is in Clay's voice, not mine. This case brings up the importance of body worn video support. I think it could be an administrative burden, but it also brings up the idea that officers should be reviewing body worn video before writing reports. I don't know if that is feasible, given everything else we ask police officers to do, but it could have helped in this case. I have other concerns about how the two officers leapt to judgment without reviewing evidence, but I think that the investigation and the final dispositions capture my thinking and evaluation on those points. Then I'm done.
Thank you, Clay.
I'm done with Clay.
Thanks, Clay.
But now we will go around and talk about adjudications. Do we need to go? So I guess last time what we did was we talked about the ones that were agreed. That where everyone agreed, and if, like, we do a show of hands, if we agree with the ones that were agreed.
There were only two.
I mean, should we just go through them all? Can
we put the slide up?
we put the slide up, please?
That would be helpful.
Me on the spot.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, this will never get messed up, except right now.
Okay, so for Officer A. Arrests, it was sustained on all three. I guess I just raise your hand if you agree with sustained for arrests.
Anybody disagree with Officer A with regards to arrests? Okay,
Okay, preliminary investigations sustained. Does anybody disagree with sustained? For Officer A, judgment, does anybody disagree with sustained?
I don't think that's quantifiable, but that's my problem.
Okay,
so insufficient evidence or what's our interest?
It doesn't, it's just
Okay.
agreed.
Okay.
We don't
Disagree,
do that.
that's all.
all right, now for truthfulness for Officer A, I guess we'll go around the table and say how we would adjudicate it, or how, what we. You start. Please.
Sustained.
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 Insufficient evidence.
Sustained. So for Officer B,
I went with the auditor.
Thank you.
it's not a contest.
I know, I heard that.
Officer B for arrests, does anybody disagree with sustained? Officer B preliminary investigations, disagree with sustained? And then judgment, we'll go around the table again,
Same thing. Insufficient evidence.
insufficient, I agree, insufficient evidence.
I would also say insufficient evidence.
I sustained.
Back on the auditor, sustained.
Okay. Any final comments? Okay, this is a big one, thank you all for taking this one on. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No.
I just want to say for final comments, I think that this was a really good, excuse me,
Unless you want to find.
no,
Okay.
no.
Okay, so elections
you.
for liaisons for Police and Human Rights Commission, I did get an email from Clay. Clay said that,
Sorry. I'm sorry.
they said that they will do it.
You guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank Bye-bye, Cindy and Rand. Fine.
They will do it, but they also would be fine if other people wanted to do the Human Rights Commission. Is that how you read it also?
Apparently I wrote it this morning, nothing to do with it, but I was wrong. That sounds right. Don't trust me right now.
I can read what he said.
Okay.
I won't be able to make it to the meeting tonight, and I'm finishing up my review at the moment. I also want to say that I am happy to serve as the liaison, but I'm also time strapped this year, so wouldn't prefer it if others are willing to serve.
Right, yes, also, yeah. That sounds right. Also.
Oh, wouldn't prefer to be on the board, right? The way it was written was.
Sounds
Okay.
like he nominated you.
I'm not, I decline.
Is it part of our charter? How is it that, are we required, and because somebody comes
Your
from bylaws,
bylaws.
is it bylaws?
Mhm,
The Human Rights Commission comes here
mhm,
and we send somebody there,
mhm. Yeah,
but a police commission, we just send somebody there.
That person is a dual member.
because they are both, they are appointed to both, so it is a different relationship, but yes, we are, in our bylaws, it provides for a liaison to the HRC and a co. You know what I mean, I'm not gonna keep talking.
So this year it was Clay for human rights.
I don't know what to say.
So is it?
It was you? No, Clay took over for you.
Oh.
And then Alan has been on the police commission.
But never,
I took over for Jose, I'm sorry, for Michael.
Michael.
yeah.
Um,
I was doing everything.
Yeah.
Take
The credit.
With a couple months left in the year, and I'm fully prepared to continue it. That's the will of the group.
Okay, so let's start with that, since.
Quick question, did city council already?
Yes.
Okay.
Is there anybody else who'd like to be on police commission? Put their name forward. Okay,
Okay.
then I'll nominate Alan. Do we nominate him?
I'll second.
All in favor.
All in favor? All right.
I'm voting for Clay. I mean, for Clay's vote for.
On his behalf.
On.
There you
Oh,
Sure, I had a proxy.
I don't know if we can do that. We can do this without two people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Especially
and
if you
then
nominate one of them.
Human Rights Commission. Is there anybody who wants to do it? So we could nominate Clay and or Monique. We could just nominate them to.
Or we
go.
could postpone to the next month and gauge interest. in
It will
the-
teach them both well.
I move that
You're not here.
I'll second the tabling of
We will table it till next.
the
We have to
election.
say all in favor of tabling.
All in favor of tabling?
Beautiful, all right. Yeah.
Closing comments. You had something to say.
Are you sure? Okay.
It's time.
I wanted to say that I thought that this was a great case to be reviewing. It's one that I think, obviously, there's some strong feelings on, but like, again, I think it cuts to the core and communicates to the. It's one where we communicate to the people of Eugene, like some kind of shared values about policing. And in a way that's really grounded, so, yes. Yeah.
And I guess I look at it, if this had all been done, if someone had gone up to a police officer, said, this person scratched my car. They were wearing this, they were doing this, and they did all of this, and then, 2 weeks later, they say, oh, yeah, no, I looked at my home ring camera and no, it wasn't him. I mean, it's like, it would have already at that point had, a charge of, criminal mischief against somebody. And then, giving false information to a police officer, or false report. Yeah. And I couldn't take that out of the back of my mind that, if a member of our community who we don't hold to the same standard as a police officer gave this whole tall tale, it would be a lot of trouble for him. And, I go back to so many careers that get ended because people do stupid things. But that's not my job to make sure people don't do stupid things that end their careers. I mean, we can think of teachers, we can think of ministers and, counselors. I mean, we think of all sorts of people that have done things, and they lose their career, and it's kind of like, well, wow, I'm really sorry that you're in that predicament. But, and I guess, it's kind of, if we had people come in and start talking to us before the cases, if an officer came in and said, hey, you're gonna review my case today, and I want to tell you kind of more what I was thinking that I didn't really share with the IA. I mean, it's like, where do we end? And then the final thought was it, I can't remember what it was, the first case that we had, the downtown citizen community impact case, that people went to the courts to try and get our files. And the courts said, no, you don't get the files. And they appealed it. And it was kind of the judge used the thing. It's like, it's the cat in the hat, at what point do we stop? And you know, it's like, I kind of think of these, it's like, at what point do the lies and the storytelling stop? And until somebody finally says, no, you can't tell tall tales. Is there a policy that needs to be rewritten to tell them not to make stuff up? I mean, do we really have to tell people to be prepared for their job, for an interview that could affect their job? Again, I don't think it's on us all the time. I think people need to have a little bit more common sense and just stop being stupid. You don't get to talk.
I'm not quite.
Okay.
That's a later.
I just think I just shake my head, a misdemeanor, criminal misdemeanor, to me, like, that's just mind blowing, that there's so many, like. I dealt with thousands and thousands of misdemeanor Eugene cases from trespass and alcohol and criminal mischief and stuff, and to think that all of this effort and investigative time and all of us at this table, it just shows a very robust system, you know, and shows that even, you know, an insignificant, like something so trivial in a sense, you know, is not, and so I'm impressed by that.
I agree. I think that Lieutenant went way beyond the Call of Duty on this one, and within, I don't know, several days had the second videotape of the vehicle. My gosh, that was, and just to have to wade through that whole thing was painful just to watch. It was not a pleasant experience to watch that event, and no, I agree with that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for doing this. This is a big one. I think when Jose and I picked it, we talked a lot about if it was the right one and knowing that the conversation could get interesting. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this one. It was good.
Move to adjourn.
Adjourn,
All in favor?
April 11th.
Now let me say what I want to say.